So imagine you're standing in the middle of a harsh, just totally unforgiving desert. The air is dry, your throat is parched, and your muscles are just aching from days of travel.
Right. You're already completely exhausted before anything even happened.
Exactly. You are utterly exhausted. And then you look to your left, you look to your right, and you count exactly 312 other people standing there with you.
Wow. Just 312.
Yeah, that's it. That is your entire force. Your weapons are weak, mostly just, whatever you could scrape together in a hurry. You don't have enough armor.
So you're basically a sitting duck.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
But then it gets worse because you look across the battlefield and marching toward you is a terrifying, fully equipped, highly trained army of 1,000 soldiers.
Oh, man.
The morning sun is literally glinting off their chainmail. I mean, they have the numbers, the weapons, the resources, just the sheer, undeniable physical power. So I am asking you directly, the person listening right now, in that moment, staring down an impossible mathematical reality, what goes through your mind? Do you run? Or do you stand your ground?
I mean, it's a scenario that forces us to confront the very limits of human endurance, really. When the physical reality staring you in the face completely contradicts any logical hope for survival, the natural biological response is, well, panic.
Yeah, fight or flight. And usually flight.
Exactly. The instinct is flight. It's preservation.
And yet, the event we are looking at today defies that biological instinct entirely. We're doing a deep dive today into the historical and spiritual accounts of the Battle of Badr.
Which is such an incredible moment in history.
It really is. And our sources today, they're a collection of deep historical texts and spiritual narratives that detail this exact pivotal standoff. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how such a massive, glaring physical disparity was actually overcome.
Right, because we aren't just looking at military history here. We are looking at the mechanics of fate.
Yes, exactly. We're exploring the profound premise that true strength might actually lie in conviction rather than, sheer numbers or material resources. It's kind of the ultimate underdog story, but this isn't some sports movie.
No, not at all.
This was a real moment where the survival of an entire belief system just hung by a single thread.
And that completely upends how we are taught to calculate power in the modern world. I mean, we are so heavily conditioned to measure strength by what we can count.
Right. We love our spreadsheets.
We do. We look at dollars, weapons, personnel, data points. If the spreadsheet says we are at a disadvantage, we just assume defeat is inevitable.
Yeah, we throw in the towel.
But the accounts of Badr invite us to calculate strength using a completely different metric, one that operates underneath the physical surface.
Because within the spiritual narratives we're examining, this specific clash isn't just remembered as some, minor skirmish in the sand. The texts refer to it as Yamul Furqan.
Yeah, Yamul Furqan. That translates to the Day of Distinction, or the Day of Criterion.
The Day of Criterion, I love that.
It is remembered as the definitive moment that separated truth from falsehood. It was the ultimate stress test for this early community of believers, basically establishing whether spiritual conviction could actually physically withstand an overwhelming material force.
Right. Could faith block a sword?
Exactly. And to understand the gravity of that, we have to look at the immense pressure these people were already under before they even reached the battlefield.
Because these two groups didn't just accidentally bump into each other. This was the boiling point of a very long, very painful pressure cooker. The historical texts show a background rooted in intense persecution. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his early followers had faced severe systematic oppression in Mecca.
Yes, from the ruling tribe, the Quraysh.
Right, the Quraysh. And it reached the point where the danger was so absolute that the Muslims had to leave their homes and migrate to the city of Medina.
And we really shouldn't gloss over what that migration actually meant. They didn't just casually pack up a U-Haul and move to a new city. They fled as refugees.
That is such a crucial detail, because when people flee like that, they leave behind generational wealth, their businesses, their properties, the infrastructure of their entire lives.
Everything.
They arrived in Medina with essentially nothing. And usually, when a group of people experiences that kind of massive sunk cost, when they lose absolutely everything, they become incredibly risk-averse.
Oh, of course. You'd want to just lay low.
Right, you hide. The trauma of that loss usually breaks a community's spirit.
But the narrative here shows a community that refused to be broken. And the oppression from the Quraysh didn't just magically stop because the Muslims had relocated.
Yeah, it got worse.
The Meccans actually confiscated all the property and wealth the Muslims had been forced to leave behind.
Yeah.
They continuously threatened further attacks. They were working to entirely extinguish this new faith. So the tension was this constant, suffocating presence.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the catalyst of this whole battle. Because news arrives in Medina that a very large, incredibly wealthy Quraysh caravan is approaching from Mecca, traveling along a nearby trade route. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, intends to intercept this caravan. It's a strategic move, right? Like a way to apply economic pressure on the Quraysh and perhaps recover some of the immense wealth that had been unjustly stripped from his people.
However, the flow of information shifts the reality on the ground pretty fast. Word gets back to Mecca that their highly valuable caravan is being targeted.
Word travels fast in the desert.
It sure does. And the Quraysh leaders decide this isn't just a moment to protect their goods. They see this as their definitive moment to crush the Muslims once and for all. So they don't just send a security detail of merchants. They mobilize a massive military force.
And that brings us to the numbers, which are genuinely staggering when you visualize them. The Muslim group that had originally set out from Medina, they were not an army prepared for a massive, decisive war.
Not even close.
They had exactly 313 people.
313 individuals, and if we look at their logistical capability, it's almost non-existent. According to the historical texts, they had a grand total of 2 horses.
Wait, 2 horses for 313 people.
Just 2 horses.
That is insane.
And 70 camels, which meant they were taking turns riding, sharing mounts across an exhausting desert landscape. Many of them were just walking the whole way.
Now contrast that with the opposing Meccan army, 1,000 soldiers, fully armed, hundreds of horses, plentiful supplies.
They were ready for war.
They were a well-fed, heavily armored military machine, marching out with the explicit intent to intimidate, overwhelm, and destroy.
It is the very definition of an asymmetrical conflict. The Quraysh had the ultimate material advantage.
Okay, hold on. This is where I have to challenge the premise a bit.
Sure, God.
Because anyone listening right now is doing the math in their head. 313 exhausted people against 1,000 armored soldiers. Logically, I mean, this is a suicide mission.
On paper, yes.
You mentioned earlier that this was a test of spiritual psychology, but spiritual psychology doesn't block a literal sword from piercing your chest. How does a mindset shift actually keep these 313 men from breaking formation the second they see that massive army cresting the hill?
That is the exact friction point of this entire event. You are absolutely right. If you judge this by any earthly metric, a positive mindset does not deflect steel.
Right.
But the preparation the sources describe wasn't just about, cultivating a positive mindset. It was about accessing a fundamentally different source of power. When you do not have the physical means to match your opponent, when you cannot match swords with swords, you have to shift the battleground to a place they cannot measure.
Okay, which brings us to the night before the battle. If I am in a leadership position, and I know I am outnumbered basically 3-to-1 with an army arriving at dawn, human instinct dictates that I am panic planning.
Oh yeah, you'd be scrambling.
I am spending the entire night drawing tactical diagrams in the sand. I am frantically sharpening whatever rusted piece of metal I have. I am trying to manufacture a physical solution to a physical problem.
But the sources show a complete abandonment of that physical scrambling. The narrative focuses entirely on a different kind of labor.
Which is fascinating.
Because any physical preparation would have been vastly inadequate. There was no tactical genius, no sudden formation that was going to magically multiply 313 exhausted men into a force capable of conventionally defeating 1,000 armored soldiers.
So instead of a frantic war council, we get one of the most intense, emotionally heavy scenes in the historical texts. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, separates himself from the camp. While his followers are trying to get some rest, he spends the entire night in deep, agonizingly intense prayer.
And we really need to dissect the psychology of that prayer. He is entirely aware of the stakes. He knows the grim reality of the numbers. He knows the physical frailty of the men sleeping behind him.
Yeah, he feels every ounce of that responsibility. The sources record a specific, incredibly weighty plea that he makes during this night of devotion. He prays, "O Allah, if this small group is defeated, there will be no one left on earth to take your name."
Notice the framing of that plea. It is not just a standard request for survival.
Yeah.
It is an acknowledgement of ultimate cosmic leverage.
Wow.
He is linking the survival of these 313 people directly to the survival of the divine message on Earth. But more importantly, look at the absolute vulnerability in that moment.
Yeah, it's not a pep rally.
Exactly. It isn't a boastful, chest-beating war cry to pump himself up.
Mm-hmm.
He is presenting the raw, terrifying reality of their utter helplessness to a higher power.
It's a deeply physical manifestation of spiritual burden. The texts describe him praying with such intense depth, such profound physical exertion and emotion, that his cloak actually fell from his shoulders.
Yeah.
He was so completely absorbed in this state of pleading for divine assistance that he didn't even notice the garment slipping away.
And that falling cloak is a brilliant symbol of the leadership paradox at play here. In conventional military history, a leader facing impossible odds is expected to project a facade of stoic invulnerability, right?
Yeah.
You hide your fear so your men don't panic.
Right, never let them see you sweat.
But here, the leader is utterly, profoundly broken before God.
And that actually raises a fascinating dynamic. By allowing himself to be completely vulnerable and powerless in front of the divine, he somehow translates that into an unbreakable confidence in front of his followers the next morning.
Precisely. It introduces the concept of surrender as an offensive strategy.
Surrender as an offensive strategy. Let's unpack that.
Well, we usually think of surrender as waving a white flag and losing. But in this spiritual context, admitting total powerlessness, surrendering the illusion that you can control the outcome with your meager resources, it actually eliminates the fear of failure. It shifts the entire burden. He takes the paralyzing weight of survival off of human frailty and places it squarely on infinite divine capability.
That makes so much sense. I mean, think about the heaviest responsibility you, the listener, have ever held. Maybe it was a failing business, a critically ill family member, or some crisis where a dozen people were looking at you to fix it. You know, that suffocating feeling in your chest.
It's crushing.
Now magnify that. You are carrying the survival of an entire faith, the physical lives of your closest friends, standing in the cold desert night, knowing 1,000 armed men are waiting for the sun to rise to wipe you off the map. If you try to hold that weight yourself, you shatter.
You absolutely shatter. There's no way around it. But the act of sincere prayer, dua, it acts as a release valve. By admitting you cannot do it alone, you actually access the capacity to endure what comes next.
And what comes next is the dawn. The sun rises, the night of deep devotion ends, and that spiritual conviction now has to face cold, hard reality on the battlefield. So the two sides line up.
The clash begins with a customary tradition of that era, which is single combat.
Right.
Before the general melee, champions from each side step out into the open space between the armies to duel.
The texts highlight 3 historical giants from the Muslim side stepping forward. Hazrat Hamza, Hazrat Ali, and Hazrat Ubaidah. They walk out to meet the elite champions of the heavily armed Quraysh.
Let's analyze the psychological impact of this moment. The Quraysh army derives its confidence from its mass and its hierarchy. They are absolutely certain of their invincibility because they look at their own elites, their most heavily armored, experienced warriors, and they just assume superiority.
They assume it's going to be a slaughter. But the duels don't play out the way the math suggests. Hamza, Ali, and Ubaidah don't just survive these engagements, they dominate them. They strike decisive early victories, taking down the Quraysh champions.
And that sends a massive psychological shockwave through both camps. An ancient army's morale is incredibly fragile, often tied directly to the myth of its own invincibility.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When their heavily armored champions fall in single combat to an under-equipped force, that myth instantly shatters.
It's like structural engineering. You can build a massive, sprawling skyscraper out of cheap materials, but a small, tightly compacted diamond will still cut right through it. The Quraysh had the volume of men, but Badr was about the density of conviction. These early duels proved that the Muslims' conviction had real physical teeth.
It creates a sudden, soaring realization for the 313. The overnight prayer wasn't just a comforting thought exercise. It is actively manifesting in the physical prowess of their champions.
But inevitably, the individual duels end and the general melee begins. The lines crash together. And we have to be realistic here. It is still 313 against 1,000.
Right. The physical reality hasn't vanished.
Exactly. Fatigue sets in. Dehydration sets in. Your arms feel like lead after swinging a heavy weapon for just a few minutes.
Which is where the historical and spiritual texts introduce the most profound element of the narrative. Unseen help.
Yes, this is the part that just gives you chills.
The texts explicitly detail divine intervention on the battlefield. As the physical toll began to mount and human endurance reached its breaking point, the accounts state that divine help arrived in the form of angels.
And the sources don't treat this as a metaphor. They mention specific visual accounts from the companions who were in the thick of the fighting. They reported seeing angels clad in white garments directly aiding the believers in the absolute chaos of the melee.
And we have to consider how that radically alters the human capacity to fight. Let's go back to your earlier pushback. How does mindset keep you from breaking formation?
Right, because if I'm exhausted and vastly outgunned, my biological imperative is to drop my weapon and run for the hills.
But if, in the middle of that desperate survival, you realize you are literally not fighting alone, if you perceive divine entities fighting alongside you, it completely short-circuits that biological fear response.
Oh, absolutely.
The adrenaline surge, the elimination of the fear of death, it transforms a soldier. If you know heaven is intervening on your behalf, death loses its sting entirely. You swing your sword differently. You stand your ground with an immovable foundation.
It is the ultimate validation of the overnight prayer. The vulnerability of the prophet in the dark resulted in an external, unseen reality breaking into the physical world in the daylight. The Quraysh brought 1,000 swords, but the Muslims brought an unshakable connection to the divine.
And the outcome clearly demonstrates which force held the actual lasting power.
Let's look at that outcome, because the battle eventually draws to a close, and the results fundamentally alter the trajectory of history.
Against every single measurable metric of military science, the vastly outnumbered, under-equipped Muslims achieved a decisive, overwhelming victory.
The sources record that 70 enemies from the Quraysh army were killed and another 70 were taken prisoner. A massive, intimidating military machine of 1,000 men, completely fractured, lost its leadership structure, and just retreated into the desert.
And we really must emphasize a critical point here. The historical texts are very clear that this was not merely a tactical military triumph.
No, not at all.
If we reduce the Battle of Badr to a discussion of flanking maneuvers or a stroke of luck, we miss the entire thesis of the event. This was definitively a victory of Iman, of faith.
Because if it was just about military tactics, the 1,000 guys with the chainmail and hundreds of horses should have won every single time. There is no tactical trick that overcomes a 3-to-1 disadvantage when you only have 2 horses.
Precisely. The seemingly weak army won because their foundational reliance was rock solid. The Quraysh were fighting to maintain the status quo. They were fighting for pride, for economic dominance, for the preservation of their own ego.
Right, material things.
But the believers were fighting for ultimate truth, standing firmly on the profound reliance they had solidified the night before. Their conviction was simply denser than the enemy's steel.
So we have unpacked the history, the staggering numbers, the psychology of the prayer, and the divine intervention. But how does this ancient event in the desert translate into a takeaway for someone listening to us right now? Most of us are not going to find ourselves in a literal physical standoff against 1,000 armed soldiers anytime soon.
No, thankfully not. But the human experience guarantees that we will all face our own metaphorical 1,000-soldier armies.
That is such a crucial realization. Think about the massive, seemingly insurmountable obstacles you encounter in your own life. It could be an impossible deadline at work that threatens everything you've built. It could be a sudden, terrifying health diagnosis that makes you feel completely stripped of your agency.
Or financial ruin.
Exactly, financial ruin staring you right in the face. These are the moments where you tally up your own resources, your energy, your bank account, your available options, and you realize you only have 313, and the problem requires 1,000.
And in those moments, the spreadsheet of your life tells you that you are going to fail. Logic dictates defeat. The pressure makes you want to panic and scramble, just like an army realizing it's vastly outnumbered.
But that is exactly where the core insight of Badr becomes a practical tool. It teaches us that strength is definitively not found in what you can count. It isn't found in your wealth, your numbers, or your stockpiled resources. True strength is found in the willingness to admit your own limitations and surrender your reliance to a higher power.
It demands a complete paradigm shift from us. We are obsessed with control.
We really are.
We think if we just work harder, plan better, or worry more, we can force a physical solution. Badr teaches us that ultimate surrender to the divine, admitting that we are powerless on our own, is actually the prerequisite for accessing infinite power. The unseen forces of faith, resilience, and divine support are the actual heavyweights in any crisis.
To bring this deep dive to a close, let's just pause and respect the sheer magnitude of what we've explored today. 313 under-equipped, physically exhausted individuals completely changed the course of history. They didn't achieve this by stumbling upon a hidden cache of weapons. They achieved it through sheer, unadulterated spiritual strength.
Yes.
It was born in an intensely vulnerable, cloak-dropping night of prayer. It manifested in individual bravery that defied all logical metrics, and it was solidified by an absolute reliance on divine help that actually broke through into the physical battlefield. They proved that when your foundation is built on truth and ultimate trust, the impossible math of the physical world simply ceases to matter.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a lingering question. A way to apply the reality of Yomel Furqan directly to your own circumstances today. Think about the biggest, most intimidating, seemingly unsolvable obstacle standing in front of you right now.
That one thing keeping you up at night.
Right. If the Battle of Badr proves that victory isn't determined by the tangible resources you hold in your hands, but by the conviction and reliance you hold in your heart, what impossible battle in your own life might actually be winnable right now if you simply surrendered the illusion of control and changed where you place your trust?